The first episode of Moon Knight is now streaming on Disney+, so we gotta do our classic spoiler review. We follow mild-mannered Stephen Grant as he begins to see his life slowly falling apart before discovering that he shares his body with mercenary Mark Spector, who himself becomes the warrior known as Moon Knight. Now, before I properly start with my review for episode 1 of Moon Knight, in case the title didn't give it away, this is a spoiler review. I have a spoiler-free review for the first 4 episodes right up here, right now on the channel, or you can go watch the first episode right now on Disney+. And of course, all spoilers are valid as you start the conversation in the comments below. And if you love movies and TV, this is the place to be, so consider clicking that subscribe button so you don't miss any future conversation on your favorite movies and TV. And if you saw my spoiler-free review, you know I'm very much in love with this show right now, and this first episode is a big reason for it. Because as soon as it begins, it starts to disorient you. You begin to see this episode as this guy is waking up in different places. He really doesn't remember what he did last night. His life feels like these disjointed pieces that don't really go well together, and all this before really diving into things. And I really liked it because it presents this show as a mystery, as kind of this jigsaw puzzle that you have to put together alongside this character. And by choosing to present us only Stephen's perspective of events, of his day-to-day life with those big missing gaps, the show presents us this very different character than any other thing we've seen in the MCU, whether it's characters that we already knew, whether it's characters that we went to meet along the way. This doesn't feel like a guy who's going to become a superhero. This feels like an everyman who's just caught in this wild storm of insanity, which is kind of a perfect way to describe this show as a whole. You see him like venting to this golden statue man who just sits there hoping to make some money, and he even helps him. So it makes us like Stephen, as this lady as well at the museum that works with him asks him about dinner, and they are meant to meet up at the steakhouse. And then through the episode we see a few things happening, and he goes to the steakhouse in the wrong day. And it's very depressing. The show does a really good job at making you endeared to Stephen throughout this, and it does a great job at making you pity him. So there's a really good level of empathy for this character. There's a really good level of sympathy for him as well. And Oscar Isaac plays this amazingly, because even in his performance you feel how this guy is lost, how he's completely unaware of what is actually going on as he finds himself suddenly in this strange location, in this village where everyone is chasing him for a reason that he doesn't understand. He begins to hear voices in his head, and he is confronted by Arthur Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke, who's just sinister from the beginning. Just gives you this very eerie vibe throughout, as he basically controls all of these people in a cult-like mentality, in a cult-like situation. And he doesn't even want to hurt Stephen. I find their relationship very interesting, where he starts to believe Stephen the more he learns about him, and eventually starts calling him Stephen from the gift shop, Stephen Grant from the gift shop. This is really interesting, and leans a lot into that horror vibe of the show, as we see this guy who's basically the leader of a cult, and he controls everyone in every single location. He controls the people at the museum that Stephen Grant thought were his friends. He controls everyone in this village. He gets everyone to try and take the scarab that Stephen didn't know he had from him. And the way this is physically played on screen by Oscar Isaac is really good. And again, one of the best things about this show is how it doesn't show you yet the perspective of Mark Spector, the perspective of Moon Knight, the perspective of Khonshu. This episode is entirely dedicated to Stephen, but it's all the more effective because of that, showing you how lethal Mark Spector is as Steven begins to be grabbed by this group of people, and then he blanks out, and when he wakes up, he's all bloodied, they're all bloodied on the floor without getting up, and everyone just feels very afraid of him. So Mohamed Diab, who directs this episode, does a really great job in bringing that across, in telling a story without showing it. With the missing pieces that aren't in this episode, they do a really great job at conveying the danger and the information that comes with that, leading to that really cool chase sequence, and eventually to Stephen Grant waking back up in London, and now that other life that he doesn't know he has at the time is chasing him, and it's catching up to him. And that presence of that cult of Arthur Harrow, which I found really interesting, how the show begins with him going through this punishment of putting the glass in his sandals and walking with the broken glass beneath his feet, and that really allows us a glimpse into who this character is. And we'll find more about him in the coming episodes. Particularly episode 3 is one that really peels the layers of Arthur Harrow open and allow us to see more into his motivation, which I find really interesting. But we'll talk to that 2 weeks from now. But this episode already gives us a bit of a glimpse at who this guy really is. He portrays himself as this messianic figure working for this other Egyptian god. And he himself judges people of his cult with this cane. As he balances out, he has this movable tattoo that's really cool, that's really a scale, and tips the scales of good and evil. And when he tries to judge Stephen, he can't. Even the goddess he serves cannot, because there's just too much chaos in this guy, with the whole embrace the chaos thing. There are two personalities in there and a god. And so it cannot be judged. This guy is not good, is not bad. He's the living embodiment of chaos. I find that really interesting, how this guy has devoted himself to this goddess, and he has this cult of followers who are devoted to him. And then Stephen working for this one god, and they just don't have this easy relationship. And how the two contrast each other, it doesn't make a whole ton of sense right now, adds up and builds up in quite a compelling manner that contrasts these two characters and just puts them in direct opposition towards one another. I find it really interesting how that is not even the scariest part of the show in this particular episode, where Stephen, beginning to hear these voices in his head, of Khonshu, obviously, and he starts to see these glimpses of him. He feels this presence behind him when he wakes up in that village, and we don't see Khonshu for a while. I love how this episode treats that hallucination, that mental condition of his, as something dangerous and as a vulnerability that he has, because it allows us to explore that, and it allows the villain to exploit that at the cost of the hero. The thing that brings out the hero persona that the show is titled after is also the thing that makes him vulnerable. And I find that really compelling. That's really complex writing for a character, and it makes Stephen's life feel like a real tragedy. The fact that these two personas are trapped in this body, it feels completely tragic, like they cannot escape one another, and both of them keep getting on each other's way, as if neither of them can have a full life. That's interesting. That's compelling storytelling right there. That's compelling character work, and you can see it in the writing, and you can see it in the performance that Oscar Isaac is giving. So the horror vibes are really strong as we get the glimpses of Khonshu. We hear the voices in his head, but that elevator sequence as Stephen is in his apartment and he starts to see the glimpses in the mirror, he runs away, but then the elevator doesn't leave the building as he wants. That's really cool when Khonshu is at the end of the hall and starts running towards the elevator, always complaining that he's the fool. Give Mark back the body. I love that throughout this episode. But my favorite sequence is the final sequence where they use the location of the British Museum, which is really cool if you've never been. I've just been recently myself. And they use that sinister loneliness of that big venue as an interesting way to explore the character's vulnerability and bring out Moon Knight. And by the end of episode 1, this ending sequence was where he's being chased by this jackal that he doesn't know where it came from, obviously, and he traps himself in the bathroom, and he finally has a conversation with Mark. He finally sees Mark for the first time, asking him to let go of the body, to let Mark take control. And this is where it hit me that Moon Knight was really different, and it was approaching this character in a respectful manner regarding his DID, but also in a very different way regarding other superheroes. Where because Steven is not Moon Knight himself, that's the other personality, there's a weight to becoming Moon Knight. To become this all-powerful hero, these really cool weapons and powers and really cool suit, he has to let go of control. He cannot be himself the hero. There's really narrative weight to that. That's really dramatically rich for a character to willingly choose to let go of what is his body, to become a hero. And then just in that glimpse, we see the violence that Mark unleashes, that Moon Knight unleashes on his enemies. So it's a really different way to presenting the superhero of sorts, where immediately he's presented more as an anti-hero. But then we see him in action, the little glimpse, as the episode ends with him punching the jackal and then walking to the screen with a whole bathroom just exploded, like everything broken down. And he's just punching, mauling this monster in a very violent manner. Where this guy, he's not here to help anyone. He lets go of that body because it's his body. So I found it really interesting. And you feel the weight of that choice, of him becoming Moon Knight, of him rescinding control. And immediately you see an immense contrast in this guy, Steven, that we've been following, and this new guy that apparently is inhabiting his body. And that's a great way to end the first episode. That's a great hook of showcasing the inciting incident and then cutting right off before the adventure properly begins. This is a show that has such a tight pacing, and it feels like a feature-length film, where this was just the end of the first act, and now we're off to the races. My biggest issue with this episode is going to be very specific for me, but I couldn't look past the London geography. It's a little bit all over the place. Obviously, if you're not from here, you're not going to get it, but I bet if you're from America, if you're from any other part of the world and you've seen your city, your hometown in a movie, I bet you the geography for you always seems off, which is fair. It's not really something that takes the entire thing down, but it's just something that I couldn't help but notice. And as much as I think it's effective for the storytelling, selfishly, there is a bit of frustration that we don't get to see the action in this first episode, that we don't get to see that bigger, most violent side of Mark early on. I really like that we only get a glimpse at the end, where Moon Knight, as soon as he becomes Moon Knight, that jackal was doomed. He had no shot against Moon Knight. So as soon as he becomes Moon Knight, we immediately cut to the jackal already defeated. I think that's awesome. But those are only my spoiler thoughts on episode 1 of Moon Knight. I want you to start a conversation about it in the comments below. Let's talk all the spoilers, anything I missed, anything I didn't mention you want to see mentioned, let me know in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching. Remember to check that video out for my thoughts on the 4 episodes and the show itself thus far. And of course, we'll be back next week to talk more Moon Knight. There's a ton of early reviews right now up on the channel, and later today I'm giving you my review of Morbius. So thank you so much once more for watching. Thank you again to the team at Disney Plus UK, and thank you to my channel members Bruna and Stuart for making this video possible. And so until the next one, love each other and love the movies.